Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
Recent project had the need to do some translation, right? So we want to present various parts of the app in different languages. And today we thought we might talk about it because there's a couple different ways you can do that in Laravel. They have their trade-offs. And so we're going to talk through how we did it on this project and hopefully share some insights there.
Well, the first thing to know is that we're not using the Google Translate plugin on the website. There's a lot of people who do that. And as
Oh,
a middling Spanish speaker myself, I can tell you some of the translations that Google Translate comes back are like in real time, are, I guess, accurate, but not how you would say it, you know?
yeah. Like
Um,
how would you say middling in Spanish? Do you know that?
Well, see, I knew it as soon as you were. I was like, oh, I probably shouldn't even mention this
Yeah.
because it's just like a test. Like as soon as someone
Yeah.
asked me to do something, I can't do it.
Mm, yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's one of the issues I ran into. So, if you can afford it or if your project can afford it, inline translations with like a professional that
Hmm.
can speak both languages a little bit more natively is great. So there's two different ways to do those translations. There is the file the nested file system version, which inside of the lang folder, you can
Hmm.
have two different ways. There's like, I guess the easier way is the language code like en or es.json,
Yep.
where it's just a JSON file, then it's flat JSON file, and the key is the translation string, and the value is what that value is in that language.
So just to show off some of my skills, so like the key would be hello,
Oh,
and then the value would be hola
in Spanish.
in Spanish. Correct.
Yeah.
Just to try to
Right.
make it more concrete. Yeah. Just,
Yeah, good. So that's one of the ways to do it. And then the second is there's kind of like what already exists for like the validation stuff
hmm.
is there's like a folder, you know, named after the language, and then there's files named after like the slug of something you're doing. So there's
Yeah.
validation.php, which is an array with key and value. And the key is like a slug or some sort of recognizable sort of not full sentence, and the value is the whole translated string again. So it could be like
Yeah.
a folder called es, and then greetings.php, and on the left is like a hello greeting.
Well, right. And so hello isn't like the English word, but it's like maybe
Yeah,
like, welcome dash greeting or something. It's like
yeah,
a slug or a token or whatever you want to call it. It's not the
yeah,
English phrase.
yeah. And so when you use then translation, so you can use like the underscore method, or you can there's a at lang directive and
Hmm.
blade, and there's the trans helper and
Yeah.
trans underscore choice. There's a number of different ways to do these sort of translations, and to get that, depending on uh, you know if it found the slug or if it found the words, it'll translate that into whatever language you've currently set the app to. So that's how it works. And then basically these two things are identical.
Hmm.
Or like, I guess there's order of precedence. One comes, the one will come stronger than the other. But
Oh, you mean if you used both?
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
But if you don't have any overlaps, it doesn't really matter. So the interesting question we ran into is how should we do our translation? So should we pick
Hmm.
the folder based system with the PHP arrays, or should we do the one JSON file? And there's a number of questions on why we thought either would be better or worse or whatnot.
Yeah.
So
And
the first one,
no, I was just gonna say the difference too, like some of the context might be your workflow for translation too. I was talking with someone else that was also in the middle of like a multilingual site, and the path he chose was because not only was there going to be multiple external translators, but there was going to be like a lot of churn in what was being translated. It was more of like a content based system that was going to have a lot of stuff added to it, whereas ours is less that and more of like a typical web application. So just kind of throwing that out there. This isn't the one true answer, but it's the one we picked
right?
because of our workflow.
Yeah. So in general, like I said, the folder based or the file based PHP one is slugs with values, and then the JSON one is like the English or whatever primary language is, and then the
Hmm.
value on the other side is the translation. So one of the things that really drives me nuts is the first thing I considered is it happened to me on my banking website once, and like of course when it's money you really freak out.
Yep.
But it was like I finished paying something and it was like payment dot successful. That was the
Mm.
message, and
Yep.
I was like, someone forgot to translate a string.
Right.
And so I found that to be more disconcerting
Mhm.
than if like it would have, I guess, said it in Spanish or something.
Hmm.
With I would be like, oh, they picked the wrong language to say something like that. So I'm kind of putting myself in the place of if I was a Spanish speaker and
Yep.
everything was in Spanish and then all of a sudden there was one phrase in English.
Right.
That's pretty common
Yeah.
for a mistakes point of view, right?
Mhm.
Versus having just like um, a slug in there. So the first thing I thought we thought about was what is the fallback situation? So when translation
Mm.
works, it tries to find a key, and if it can't find the key, it just displays the key. Then
Oh, okay. So
so
that's the scenario you just mentioned with your bank, where
yeah,
it showed you like a slug that was never really meant for any human to see in public.
right. So it'd be like if you didn't have like in the validation
Mhm.
ones, if you remove the required thing with a missing field, instead of saying like the name field is required, it would say validation dot required. And you,
Yeah. Right.
what does that mean? So I guess theoretically you could probably try to shoehorn in a full sentence into the PHP sort of nested system, but it's really not made to do that.
Mhm.
The JSON file is the one that's basically has phrases on the left and phrases on the right. So that was the first sort of thing we went and thought about. The second was kind of like you said again, like what's the workflow? And I
Mhm.
thought it might
Right.
be easier to take a full JSON file
Yeah.
and give it to someone
Mhm.
and say, "Can you make this into you know Spanish or French or something?" Versus giving them a couple different PHP files and
Right.
saying, you open up each one of these and all, and try to put in your translations.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just thinking too, so because you said one was JSON, one is a PHP array. I guess from a syntax perspective, if this translator is a non-programmer, they're both probably equally as simple
Hmm.
or complex. But um, yeah, and I wonder too, like, are there tools where like I mean, is this a common format where somebody could like have a UI where they just drop in a JSON file and it presents it to them and they translate it? I've seen that on open source projects, but I kind of think it wasn't just a JSON file. I think it was like a special
Yeah,
kind of
it's a PO
translation file.
file.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
don't
I don't
remember what it
remember.
stands for, but
Okay.
there's a format to do this.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is with having that JSON file, having the phrase on the left, it gives more context to the translator.
Mhm.
Like seeing a message that says the name field is required is much easier to understand what their goal is to translate it into
Yeah.
versus, field dash required.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I don't really know what that's supposed to mean.
Yeah, you'd almost have to give them the full set of English files and, like, the empty set of the target language files, and then not only do you have, like, multiple files for the language you're translating, but then multiple files to, like, actually read the original text. So, yeah, it does feel a little more cumbersome.
Yeah. So you'd have to have more files. So some of the drawbacks that I guess I ran into or that I'm a little concerned about is this JSON file is getting larger and larger as my app grows out.
Yeah.
And so there's something in my mind, like I think about this almost like code, which maybe I shouldn't be,
Okay.
which is that, well, now it's 1,000 lines. Now it's 2,000 lines because I've translated all this different strings in my thing. Maybe that
Sure.
should be
Yeah.
in folders or separate files, but
Mm.
that's not what this is set up to do.
Yeah.
So if that's the sort of thing that bothers you, I can see how that'd be a problem. But again, I think it has a lot more benefits.
Yeah, I think it'd have to get pretty big for it to be performance impact on, like, opening it in an editor, right? You have to have, like,
Mhm.
a several meg file, and even that, I think, most apps can handle that. But were you thinking more like performance of the live app as it's using the translation file too, or is that a separate concern?
No, I think it was just like as you've been programming for a while, you start to get these like little flags that go off in your head, whether or not they're
Yeah.
accurate.
Code
You
smell
know,
type thing. Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes they're not accurate. They don't
Right.
necessarily apply.
Mhm.
But I've just trained myself like this is too large. Well, okay, but what can you do about it?
Right,
Nothing.
exactly.
Okay, so
Yeah.
then I guess it's not too large.
Right. Yeah.
So and then I think the final thing I would say is um it's kind of a tangent on this subject, But one of the things I've also seen people do is try to break up their strings because they want to do like bolding, or if they want to do a certain
Oh,
type of replacement or
sure.
formatting or whatnot.
Yeah.
And you really have to think about that, because where you might break up your string in English is not the same as how someone might say it
Mm-mm.
in a different language.
No.
And so when you put out a string, like you have a full sentence that makes sense and you split it in half because you want to do something, that may not be a directly translatable thing.
Yeah.
And so when you're working with these translation stuff, it makes more sense um, to just make these full sentences and use replacements. And can you imagine that if you're using the slug based version? What would you say? Like, alert error part one and alert error part two. Like,
Right.
how
Yeah.
would you do that?
Yeah, I've definitely faced that situation where it was split up and then you go to translate it or use the translation, and it's like the words are in a different order in this language. You can't yeah, the
Right.
segmentation in English doesn't apply to Hebrew or something else.
Yeah. So I guess the summary of all this is we kind of chose to do the JSON version of this. There are maybe some small drawbacks, like it's a
Mhm.
large file or whatnot, but it makes most sense based off the workflow. And I think it's going to make most sense for most people too, because you're not going to see the random slugs. It'll at least fall back to a sentence, maybe in a
Yep.
different language, but it'll be a sentence.
Mhm.
And I think it would probably be easier if you give one file with context to a translator versus slugs, and then have to say, well, cross reference this other file.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
So I remember being in third grade and we were doing a spelling bee, and I don't know why this sticks in my head, but there was this one kid. He was well, his parents owned a bar and he spent a lot of time there.
Okay.
And so his clothes and all this different stuff kind of reflected his experiences. So he would wear like band t-shirts and stuff as a third grader, where I even knew enough, like I don't know what that is, but I'm
Mhm.
pretty certain it means something adult at a bar. And so we were doing a spelling bee, and it came up to his turn. I don't know why this sticks in my head, but the teacher goes, "Spell giraffe." The long
Okay.
necked animal,
Mhm.
giraffe.
I'm familiar.
And he goes, "Okay, DRAFT."
What?
I was
What?
like, "What?" And then I
D
realized, like, oh, of course, like because he sees probably draft beers all the time,
yeah. You
and,
know,
and so
I think that's why the professional spelling bee people say, "Could you use it in a sentence?" Just to make sure
yeah.
you're not, like, mishearing it.
So you're saying as third graders we weren't professional?
No, no, that was the minor leagues. I was just thinking when you talked about the band shirts and things, is there a rule in spelling bees that you can't wear a shirt that has words on it? Because, like, could that be
Oh,
a form of cheating?
yeah. How do you spell Metallica? Oh, no, I don't think they're proper nouns, are they?
Well, it wouldn't have to be a proper noun. It could be, the World Destruction Tour, and then destruction is, like, one of your words, and, like, oh, 1 second, you just, like, look down at your shirt.
I love your understanding what band shirts would be. Things bands have, like World Destruction Tours.
I guarantee that's a shirt somewhere from a band.
Yeah, that's gonna have to check online real quick.
Okay.
You want to validate your user input, but you maybe just don't know where to start.
We built a worksheet. Maybe you'll find it helpful. It'll get you started validating. Go to masteringlaravel.io/worksheet.